Hi there, and thank you so much for joining me for another video. Now, today what I want to talk about is qualifications. And I know that a lot of homeschooling parents do worry about their children not being able to get qualifications. And if they do, how many of those qualifications will be recognised either by future employers or even by universities. So I want to say that there are some ways around this problem. And first I'll give you some practical tips and then some kind of maybe a bit more outside the box thinking. Okay, so first of all, I do know a homeschooling family who what they did for qualifications was for 6th year they sent their children to school. So the children did 1 year, actually it was in England, so I think the A-level courses are 2 years, so 2 years. I don't know if it was a school or a college, but I know that there are plenty of colleges around who will do A-levels and higher. So that is a first step. Obviously, universities are going to recognise higher and A-levels, so that would get you sorted on that. Now, I also know somebody who has never been to school but is halfway through a degree. And at the end of this degree, this person will have a degree in accounting and I think as well a chartered accounting qualification. And yeah, never been to school, never sat an exam, but there are online courses that can kind of bypass the whole system and give direct qualifications for professional qualifications. You would call an accountant, being an accountant is a profession, and believe it or not, you don't have to have an accountancy degree to work as an accountant. So I think it helps, but it's not necessary. There's another way of thinking, which is perhaps somewhat revolutionary, which is just to bypass the university system altogether. Now, I think this is the route that I would advocate because, well, let's talk Scotland and then let's talk other places. Now, in Scotland, if you are Scottish, you do not have to pay fees for your course. And there are pros and cons to this because, as I said in a previous video, there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's no such thing as a free degree either. So on the pro side, if you get into your preferred course at your preferred university, there's no fee for, as I said, classes. You don't pay. However, there's still living expenses. If the child was to live at home, if the student was to live at home throughout the degree, well, that fixes that problem, and they could perhaps get a part-time job to pay for their personal items and what have you. So that's a possibility. However, the downside, the drawback is that many universities in Scotland have minimal places for Scottish students because they want to attract students from other places who will pay fees because they're not getting fees for these Scottish students. So that means, yes, places in Scottish universities for Scottish students are limited. Now, let's talk about a Scottish student leaving Scotland or anybody else from anywhere else going to any other university. Basically, what happens to students is they begin their adult life in debt. Now, some courses pretty much guarantee a job at the end, but many don't. And some courses, as well as, that don't guarantee a job, a student may end up working, as many do, in a restaurant, in fast food, in some kind of service industry, which has low pay, and they're saddled with this multi-thousand-pound loan for years ahead. And, I remember I did a degree. I might even have done 2 degrees after the student loan policy was brought in, and I did my main degree. I got a grant for that, so no fees, and I actually got paid living expenses. Things have changed since then. So I was in a happy position that I didn't end up with debt at the end of my student career. But many do, especially if they want to do a master's degree or a PhD. Some PhDs actually are funded, so that can take away some of the stress. But starting your life with thousands of pounds worth of debt is not a good situation. And it doesn't, I guess if you were going to be a doctor, you've got no option but to go to university and go through the system, essentially, and come out and enter another system, the medical system. I'm going to say I'm not sure about engineers. My dad was an engineer. He did not go to university. My brother is an engineer. He did go to university. I am certain that it's possible to be an engineer without a degree. The question would be, how easy is it to get a job in engineering without a degree? That's a different question. So, if you wanted to end up being, I'm going to say, a scientist or working in academia, well, you have to go to university to do that. I personally am not a fan of either of these careers, because somebody in those fields is going to be working for the state, and the state will completely control them. And I'm going to say a lot of these fields have been massively corrupted. So somebody working in these fields is essentially doing the government's bidding, right or wrong. It's not pretty, so I don't recommend it. So personally, I think university can be avoided. Now, we should talk a little bit about medicine, because I'm going to say it is possible to be useful, let's say, in the field of health without going to university. What do I mean by that? Well, YouTube is full of videos about how to improve your health. And I'm going to say that I've watched a lot, but most of the ones I've watched are about eating habits, diet, what to eat, when to eat, why to eat. And I guess if you could do some one-to-one with patients, you'd actually be able to help them significantly if you could help them down a nutritional route. I've got a friend who has a skin issue that flares up from time to time, And guess what? She is dealing with that through her diet. There are specific diets that can help this particular issue that she has. And so that's what she's done. She is working on her health, not through medication, but through diet. I've got another friend. Now, this is a crazy situation. This friend of mine, I'm going to say 2 years ago, I can't remember the timeline, she wasn't well, and actually at that time there was issues with her gallbladder. She went in to get a scan, and during the scan it was discovered that she only had one kidney. She only has one kidney. And that kidney that she has was, I think she said, stage 4 kidney disease. I don't actually know what that really means, but I don't know if there is a stage 5. I know that when they talk about cancer, it's stage 4, that's when it's metastasized. Well, kidney disease doesn't metastasize, it stays in the kidney, but I presume it was quite advanced. And she did some research and discovered that if she eliminated something called oxalates from her diet, she could heal her kidney. And guess what she did? She went back to the doctor. The doctor was quite nonplussed, if I'm honest, but she is healthy. So the point I'm making here by saying this is you could still actively participate in restoring people's health without going to university. So my final thought on qualifications is the best route, in my humble opinion, is entrepreneurship. Start a business. Avoid working for anybody. Work for yourself. Or if you should be encouraging your children to work for themselves. We kind of live in a society that's very much school trains us to get qualifications to get a good job, and when we talk about a good job, we assume that we're going to be working for somebody else. Often that's going to be the state, whether it be through the NHS, which is apparently the biggest employer in the world, or it's up there, which seems crazy. Or being a teacher, you're working for the state. Being a lawyer, you're working for the state, but perhaps at an arm's length, in a sense. I mean, there's a lot of law firms, but essentially, they're part of the legal system. So whether you want to go down that route, I mean, 100%, the legal system needs ethical lawyers, people who are going to interrogate the law and say, this is an unjust law, etc., etc. There's lots of bureaucratic jobs in the council, in Holyrood, in Westminster. The civil service is enormous. It seems to be ever growing. So there's plenty of state jobs. But if our aim is to give our next generation the best possible chance, and if what we want is to see our own nation thrive, and these two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're sort of dependent on one another. What we want is a thriving nation to leave to our next generation, but we also need our next generation to make this nation thrive. The two things are inextricably linked. Then we need to really encourage entrepreneurship. Scotland, Britain has a rich history of entrepreneurs, of inventors, all sorts. We've really lost our way here. We're miles behind the USA, miles behind China. We're miles behind China. What a sad state of affairs. But our time isn't over. We can be great again. And I reckon entrepreneurship is the way forward. Now, I think I might do a video on what I mean by entrepreneurship, because it is a big subject and it could be daunting. So I'm going to leave things as they are for now, and thanks so much for watching. Bye.